The evening light spilled softly through the half-open curtains, painting long streaks of gold across the living room floor. The air carried that faint scent of petrichor, fresh from the drizzle that had kissed the city a while ago. He sat on the couch, lost somewhere between thought and silence, when she entered barefoot, her hair still damp from the rain, a loose sweater falling carelessly over her shoulder. She didn't speak at first. She just walked toward the window and placed her palm against the glass, watching the last drops of rain trace thin paths downward. He watched her reflection instead of her face, noticing the way her breathing matched the rhythm of the rain outside. The stillness between them wasn't empty. It was charged, almost trembling. When she finally turned, her eyes carried that quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't need words. She smiled faintly, as if apologizing for something unspoken, and then sat beside him. The room was warm, the air heavy with the scent of coffee and something else that invisible tension neither dared to name. Her fingers brushed against his hand as she reached for the mug on the table, and for a second, time hesitated. He could hear the ticking of the old clock on the wall, every second louder than it should have been. Her hand didn't move away immediately. It lingered, her touch light but deliberate. They talked about small things, the rain, a movie they both hadn't finished, the way evenings sometimes made the world seem softer, but beneath every word was a river of meaning, pulling them quietly under. She leaned back, resting her head on the couch cushion, and sighed. "You know," she said softly, her voice threading through the dim light, "sometimes it's easier to just stop thinking, to stop fighting everything." Her tone was half confession, half invitation. He looked at her, unsure if she meant the words the way they sounded. Her gaze found his, steady yet trembling at the edges. "Son, go with the flow," she whispered, the words escaping her like a secret she'd been holding too long. "I'm enjoying this." The syllables hung between them, fragile and intoxicating. His breath caught. The sound of rain against the window filled the silence that followed, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. She didn't move closer, but something inside him did a step he couldn't take, a thought he couldn't quiet. Her eyes softened, and she smiled again, that small, sad smile that carried 1,000 emotions she would never say aloud. The light shifted, shadows blending around them, and for that brief moment, it felt like the world outside had dissolved. No noise, no time, no judgment. Just two souls suspended in a space that shouldn't exist, bound by something that both warmed and wounded. And as the night deepened, her whisper replayed in his mind, the words not fading but sinking deeper, like rain seeping into earth, leaving traces long after the storm had passed. The night stretched longer than either of them expected. The rain had stopped, leaving behind the earthy scent that wrapped around the house like an old, familiar memory. She was sitting cross-legged on the rug now, near the dim glow of a floor lamp, flipping through an old photo album she had found on the shelf. The pages whispered when she turned them, and he could see how her fingers trembled slightly when they stopped at certain pictures. There was laughter frozen in those photographs, smiles that once meant everything. He noticed how her expression softened, wistful, distant, as though she was looking through a window into another life. He moved closer, sitting across from her, his knees almost touching hers. The warmth from the nearby lamp touched her face, outlining her in gold. For a long moment, neither spoke. He just watched her trace the corner of a photograph with her fingertip, her nails short and neatly kept, her hand trembling with something that wasn't quite sadness. "Do you ever feel," she said finally, her voice quiet but sure, like life just drifted past without asking what you wanted. Her eyes lifted to meet his. There was no accusation, no expectation, just a kind of tired honesty that pulled at him from somewhere deep inside. He nodded, unable to find words that would match the weight of hers, The quiet filled the room again, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of wood as the house breathed. She leaned forward slightly, her hair falling across her face, and for a moment he wanted to reach out and tuck it behind her ear, but he didn't. She looked up, perhaps sensing the thought. Her lips curved into a soft, knowing smile not of mischief, but of recognition. She had felt it too, that strange pull between what's right and what feels real. The light flickered for a second, casting a soft shadow across her eyes. She looked at him then, truly looked, and the air seemed to thin between them. "You're so quiet tonight," she whispered. He tried to smile, but it faltered. "I don't know what to say," he replied. She tilted her head, her gaze steady and gentle. "Then don't," she said, her tone carrying a tenderness that hurt more than it soothed. "You don't always have to fill the silence. Sometimes the silence says everything." She reached out, not to touch him, but to hand him a photograph, one of them laughing together, caught in a candid moment months ago. He took it and their fingers brushed once more, igniting that same trembling warmth that neither wanted to acknowledge. The space between them felt alive, humming softly like the aftertaste of a song that refuses to end. She looked down again, her voice barely a murmur. "It's strange, isn't it? How something so simple can feel so heavy." Her words lingered in the air, fragile and aching, while the rain began again outside, soft and slow, like a secret returning to finish what it started. The next morning carried a quiet that felt too delicate to touch. The sunlight filtered through the curtains in thin, golden threads, dust dancing in the air like suspended time. She was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of tea in her hands, her hair pulled back loosely, her eyes tracing the garden outside. He stood in the doorway, watching her from behind, trying to read the thoughts she wasn't saying. The steam from her tea curled upward, fading into the light, and the faint sound of birds seeped through the stillness. Everything about that moment was ordinary, yet it felt as though the world had paused just for them. She sensed his presence and turned slightly, her eyes soft but unreadable. "You didn't sleep much," she said gently. Her voice carried warmth, though her smile faltered at the corners. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair, unsure whether he was more restless from lack of sleep or from the storm of thoughts that had refused to quiet down. She gestured toward the other chair beside her. "Sit," she said simply. He did. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was fragile, heavy with words that would never be spoken. Her gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the clouds hung low and the morning light shimmered faintly on wet leaves. "Last night," she said after a long pause, felt like standing at the edge of something, and not knowing if stepping forward would destroy it or make it real. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet each word struck deep. He didn't respond, his throat tightened, and he could only nod slightly. She took a sip of her tea, her hands trembling just enough for him to notice. "I'm sorry," she said then, though it wasn't clear what she was apologizing for: the words, the silence, the closeness, or the emotions they'd both tried so hard to keep at bay. The wind outside carried the faint scent of jasmine from the garden, and for a moment she closed her eyes, breathing it in like she wanted to hold onto something pure amid the chaos inside her. He watched her every detail, every flicker of expression, memorizing the way light fell across her face. When she opened her eyes again, there was something resolute in them, a quiet decision forming beneath the softness. "Some moments," she murmured, "are meant to stay untouched. If we try to hold them, they break." He wanted to argue, to tell her that some moments were worth the risk, but the words refused to come. She placed her cup down, the clink of porcelain, faint but final. Then she looked at him, really looked, her eyes saying everything she couldn't voice. Her lips parted slightly, and she whispered, "Let's keep it beautiful, the way it was." He nodded, even though his heart twisted at the thought. The light shifted again, bathing her in gold, and as she turned back toward the window, he realized that sometimes love wasn't about taking it, was about knowing when to let something sacred remain untouched, glowing quietly in memory.